Please welcome your panelists for the business case for equality, diversity, and inclusion, moderated by author and founder of CSE Consulting, Cheryl Strauss Einhorn.
Welcome all today. I'm so happy that you've come to join us. We have a terrific group of panelists. I'm just going to introduce them by their name and their title, and I hope you'll look up some of their bios, more specifically on the app or in the agenda. So all the way down on the end, we have Anilu Vazquez-Ubarri, who is the Chief Diversity Officer and Global Head of Talent at Goldman Sachs. And then we have Lesley Slaton-Brown, Chief Diversity Officer at HP and co-founder of the Curated Pathways to Innovation. Right here we have Tony Proffitt. He is the Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce, and he's on the board of directors of Gannett. Matt Harrington, Global Chief Operating Officer at Edelman. And all the way on the end, not least, is Matthew Fust, Senior Advisor at Quorum. So thank you all so much for coming. Obviously, this is an ever more central issue, not only to a healthy and successful workplace, but to a healthy and successful society. So our plan for the next hour is to talk a little bit about where the field is now, to highlight, if we can, some specific cases of success that maybe you in the audience are able to take back to your workplace and replicate, and then to discuss what's missing from the current dialogue that should be on the forefront of current leadership. And then the last 10 minutes, we hope that we can open it up for questions so that you'll have an opportunity to participate as well. So to get us started, I'm going to start over here with Tony. You at Salesforce, you have the opportunity to meet with so many companies and so many different industries. And so I thought maybe you could start us off by giving us the lay of the land as to what you're seeing now.
Absolutely, Cheryl. First of all, on behalf of Salesforce, we're thrilled to participate. And I got a chance to meet with CXO level leaders around the world. And what we are seeing is that increasingly these issues of diversity and inclusion and equality, these are the issues that are on the minds of every thoughtful CXO, CEO of any large institution, whether for-profit, nonprofit, government institutions, around the world. And you think about the tech industry, and at Salesforce, we think about the vectors of innovation on which Salesforce was founded. One was a technology model, and that the cloud was the future of enterprise software, which seems obvious now, but not so obvious 19 years ago when the company was founded. And then the business model, selling software by subscription. But that third vector, right back from the beginning, the societal model. And thinking from the beginnings of the company, what's the role the company has to play in society and having a positive imprint on society? And we look across the industry today, and you can see businesses that get a couple of those vectors right, technology model, business model, but to have a durable, sustainable, viable tech business, or any sort of business, I would argue, over the long focal length, it's super important to think about the role that your company or your institution, if it's a company or a nonprofit, has to play in society at large. And that's what we see CEOs at the boardroom level and at the management level in the front lines in companies and institutions around the world increasingly today.
Terrific, thank you. Matt Harrington, I'd like to come around to you. You also, being at Edelman, you see across many different firms with your company's communications work. Does this jibe with what Tony's experiencing?
Absolutely, and I think the vantage point that we take it is from our global study that we do annually around the nature of trust and the degree to which those we survey in 28 countries trust institutions to do the right thing. And interestingly enough, this year's survey, which we released in January, 64% of those we surveyed expect companies to engage in issues, societal issues, of import to advancing community and citizenry. And what's fascinating to me, I think, there is that it reinforces and echoes what we've seen, I think, emerging in terms of the activist CEOs, particularly around some of the issues we saw in the US in the last couple of years, where whether it was legislation proposed in Indiana or North Carolina, companies felt that they needed to speak up on behalf of their employees and, most importantly, on behalf of their values. And that is an expectation of employees now, but it's also an expectation of the consumers of the companies that are making purchase decisions.
Terrific. So, Anilu, why don't we check in with you for a minute? How does this resonate with what's happening at Goldman, and where's the firm putting resources? What kinds of specific efforts would you like to highlight?
It definitely resonates, and I completely agree that the separation between what happens right outside of your door, if you're an employer, it doesn't matter what kind of employer, and what happens once people cross the door, it doesn't really exist. And I think that companies, all of us, have pretended maybe for a little bit too long that there was a separation, that people would check themselves at the door. And so we are very determined to not be that environment and not to put our employees in that situation. But that requires us having conversations with many other people, including our clients. And they might not always see eye to eye with us. We have had experiences where we've had some very difficult conversations, but I'm encouraged by the fact that more and more, including at this conference, I'm getting requests from our clients to talk about this topic. And while we're not perfect, to learn from some of the things that have gone well. And then I always like to talk about the things that have gone wrong, if I can save people some time. But one of the very specific things that we have come to in the last couple of years is the importance of managers. And how much of everyone's experience is actually control. Everything is local politics. And so we're putting a lot of resources behind making sure that managers know that that's our expectation of them, but quite frankly, giving them the right tools, because we have tended to, hope in some ways that people convert into great managers. And so diversity, equality, and inclusion has to be an essential part of the conversation about managing and the experience of your employees.
Terrific. Lesley, you and I were talking about this before, and while Anilu was just spotlighting managers, you'd been saying it really has to come from the top. So I'd love to hear about your experiences at HP and how the conversation there is taking place.
Thank you. It's interesting. It excites me to talk about this topic because we had the opportunity at HP to start, when we split into two companies in 2015, to be very intentional about, we know that it needs to start at the top. You'll get push from the bottom as well and everywhere in between. But starting with the board allowed us to really build, the most diverse board in the tech industry. And to just say that isn't what we want to do. It's not about beating yourself on the chest. It is about the impact that has on the business, bottom line. And so we have about 50% diverse representation, underrepresented, diversity across our board, 40% of female representation alone, and 30% of underrepresented, so US minority representation. And we purposefully and very intentionally built what we call a dual mentorship process so that the board is pushing down and our L1 leaders, our senior leaders, are pushing up. And so there's this kind of reverse mentoring that's going on. And what we've found is that when you have it at the board, they are your accountability, and they are also the ones that are making the decisions for the future of the business. And so as a result of that, they demand more diversity. We see that as Tony said, it brings, when people can bring all of who they are into the workplace, then we see it play out through what we call our big strategy, belong, innovate, and grow. If you can feel you belong and your voice is heard, you innovate better, you're more creative. At the end, you as an individual grow, and the business bottom line grows as well.
Well, it's great. So it sounds like you've got beautiful feedback going both ways through this mentorship program. So Matt, this is right in your wheelhouse. In the context of boards of directors, what does success look like now, and what kind of progress do you think companies are making? And then from large investors like BlackRock now speaking out, how does that factor into what's happening?
Absolutely. I think the question of what does success look like was uppermost in Quorum's mind as we began working on this. We actually are part of a consortium working with directors from other underrepresented communities, Black corporate directors, women corporate directors, Latino corporate directors, toward advancing greater diversity at the board level. And as we wrestled with that question, we landed on a pretty simple statement, which is that America's boardrooms ought to look like America, which doesn't seem particularly profound, but I'll pick up on Lesley's comments. The diversity of the HP board is not normal in corporate America. In fact, the statistics that she mentioned are roughly double in terms of representation of women and racial and ethnic minorities. In the Fortune 500 as of last year's proxy season, only about 22% of board seats were held by women, only about 15% held by racial and ethnic minorities, less than 0.3% by LGBT executives. And that's the better part of corporate America. As you drop down to the Russell 3000, women represent, for example, only about 12% of directors. So large companies, for the most part, have more diverse boards than smaller companies. That said, and to the second part of your question, I hope we will look back on 2017 and 18 as a real tipping point as regards institutional investor engagement on that question. For a long time, board diversity and governance issues were really the province of impact investors, some mutual funds, some individual investors. But for the first time in 2017, we saw mainstream, very large institutional investors like State Street, whose Fearless Girl statue is in the lobby, BlackRock, the New York State Common Retirement Fund, not only engaging with management teams about board diversity, but actually voting, in some cases, against nominating and governance committee members or chairs, or sometimes the entire slate of directors up for election in an annual stockholder meeting where boards weren't sufficiently diverse. And BlackRock actually siding with activists in favor of stockholder proposals urging more diversity. And that's groundbreaking in terms of the level of engagement by institutional investors.
Terrific. You bring up such an interesting issue with HP's board because, of course, it had an opportunity to create a whole new board, which is obviously not the case for all the companies that have a legacy board and have different terms in which directors get elected and nominated. So I wonder, as we go back around, to what extent you think then that this is a process that really has to take time unless you are a relatively new company. So as we go back around, I'd love to hear each of your thoughts. But one of the common denominators for all of your organizations is that you all have these ally programs. You have people within your firms or within your organizations that pledge their support and assistance to the initiatives for equality, for diversity, and inclusion. And so, Matt Harrington, I'm going to kick this off with you. How important are these groups, and what kind of an impact are they having?
So I think they're very important on numbers of levels. The first is creating a sense of community, common agenda, and shared vision. So we have 5 alliance groups in our organization, one LGBTQ, one focused for the Black community, Latino, veterans and their families. And these groups gather, but what's most valuable and important, it's not just a group for the sort of immediate constituents in that group. It's a function of everyone in the organization is invited to participate and engage. And that's important because mentorship, sponsorship is a big part of what we're trying to accomplish so that people see what a career trajectory looks like in our organization. But a funny thing has happened is we've stood these organizations up in the last couple of years, and I think it was Lesley mentioned the mentorship between the board and the L1 levels. Well, we have what we have as called a ROTNM program, which is mentor spelt backwards. And we actually have mentors from within the organization at more junior levels and who are members of these alliance groups mentoring management and helping management understand where they're coming from, what they need to succeed, and much more rich dynamic conversations happen about how leadership can help ensure that we're not just, talking a good game, but we're actually walking it.
So these ally groups are having meetings with the senior leadership on some regular basis to give this feedback.
Yeah, and it's resulted in another transition in the firm of where we actually are creating an entire tier of mid-level career people who are going to be essentially an executive advisory board to the executive committee of the firm, because it's a different age group, it's a cohort, but their experience and exposure to technology is also quite dramatically different and informing our business so that we're doing the best by our clients.
Great. Lesley, you had mentioned the dual feedback program, but I know allies have been very important at HP. So why don't you give us an example of a successful program that the audience might be able to learn about that maybe they could replicate back at their companies?
Sure. So a couple of things. When at our split, we went down from like 175 employee resource groups to what we renamed business impact networks. And the reason we did that, again, being very intentional, is because it's more than just a values issue. It is about business impact. And so we've now grown that from 20 to almost 90 in less than 2.5 years, which is great. But what we do with allies in particular, so there are some organizations, there are some of these communities of people that are still feeling left out, no matter how much work you're doing within the company, whether they feel that they can't put a photo of their family, their partner, on their desk, or there's not the promotion opportunities. And so we've built an actual allies program for our Pride communities, or our LGBT community, whereby we've brought in advocates on behalf of LGBTQ. We do training around kind of the day in the life of. We actually do kind of a speaker series so people understand the impact that the day-to-day walk of somebody and how they have to hide when they walk through the doors. And so we have just found that. But I will also say this. I don't think it ever works to have one little drop, a trickle of something happen, or trickle, just a single program. And so we've woven that into, as we look at embedding diversity and inclusion and belonging across HP, we also ensure that through learning and development that we're teaching and we're training our leaders around growth mindset thinking. So you get out of that fixed mindset of what your belief system is and what your values are and what you do and don't believe in, to understanding that to respect this person that sits next to me gives him value and the company value. And so that's just one program that we build. There's many, but our Allies program, we do training for, it's voluntary, so at all levels, and we talk about leaders at all levels. So it is at all levels. It's also in our leadership, unconscious bias as well. So all of these things are woven into a growth mindset, which ultimately is about inclusive leadership, which is ultimately about a speak-up culture.
Terrific. Anilu, let's bring you in here, please, because Lesley was just mentioning about giving the company value. And one of the things that you had been talking about when we were chatting before is not only the relationship between the employee and the company building trust, but also doing that with clients. So could you give us an example of how you're doing this with clients as well, that maybe the audience would be able to replicate?
It's actually very related to the allyship, our early examples on it. So we've had an LGBTQ ally program since 2005. And based on the success of that, we've built it, that model. We replicate things that seem to work. Mm-hmm. And so we have it in all of our affinity networks, and they are open to everyone. But one of the very concrete examples where it came up was, the firm Goldman took a very prominent position and visible position on marriage equality and many of the conversations around the community, and having the allies be on the front lines of clients having questions about why were we being so vocal and why did that relate to the Goldman business, became a very practical business implication for us. One, it reaffirmed to our employees in the community that the firm was putting them ahead of any other value. Second, it removed the burden of having to explain that from just the people that were LGBTQ. So we've had a set of examples on the client side, but as I mentioned, this conversation has moved in ways for all kinds of employers to really be thinking about this. And to your point, if we waste this moment, shame on us, on all of us. I think that you can't waste a crisis, and so that's my approach to it. But the other thing that I would say about the allyship is that you're totally right that it has to be a multifaceted portfolio. And one of the other things that we have done is, for our Black analysts, for example, we noticed that we were losing them earlier than their white counterparts. And when it came down to it, was about how quickly were they felt connected to the firm, and the way that they felt connected in many instances was through the manager. So we have a Black Analyst Initiative that actually is really a manager initiative, but there's a third person in that initiative, which is a coach. And that person actually serves as an ally too. We don't call them that, but we're building actually that sense of understanding the experience of someone else. And so we have now also examples of those people in that program also talking to their clients about it. So if you think about it as how do you scale this conversation, there are multiple entry points that you can find.
That's great. The coach is somebody who works for Goldman as well.
And so there's a very purposeful design in it. One is the coach has to be either at the same level of seniority or more senior than the manager, because this is not a mentor where like they're behind the scenes and they don't know what they're talking about. One of the things that we're teaching is how do you confront and challenge something that the manager might have done that was not the most conducive to that person having a good experience. And so we don't want bystanders in this proposition, and we're scaling that up. So the first one was the Black analyst, that was 4 years ago. The retention rates are up the roof, their performance of everyone involved, so we look at the managers, and we just rolled it out to the Hispanic population as well, and our Asian population, but at the VP level, because that's where we noticed that we were losing that connectivity with them. So it's been a good initiative for us.
Very interesting. Tony, I'd love you to jump right in here. I know that Salesforce has had a lot of initiatives. Could you pick out one success story that you could share with us?
Sure. I may go a tad bit broader than that, but I would just say these two concepts. The notion of an ally, the idea of having vital, engaged employee resource groups. In our view, these are fundamentals of having a healthy culture. You've got to have these two elements. One thing I'd underline about the notion of being an ally is being someone's ally doesn't necessarily mean that you agree. And so often that's the fear of, you're going to invite me in to be an ally, does that mean I'm going to have to change my political party, or am I going to have to sign something, or am I going to have to give a speech, or am I going to have to change my religious affiliation if I have one? No, I mean, we think about our company as being a family, and like any family that has more than one person in it, you don't always agree, but you're always there for your siblings, your brothers and your sisters in that family. So the notion of ally it's a core element of how we work to continue to improve the Salesforce culture. We have 10 employee resource groups, 10. And I'll just give you two examples of how allies in the last couple years have come into play. And so we have, you think about how you drive great culture, and one of them is creating shared memories. And so one of the great shared memories we have is around Pride. And Pride is a celebration and standing for equality for the LGBTQ community around the world. And so we had an initiative to try to get more allies to show up for Pride. And we were able last year, Pride season's coming up again, it actually kicked off in Hyderabad already this year, to have over a 200% increase in the number of folks that showed up for Pride, showing up as allies to the LGBTQ community. And so doesn't mean they agree on every single issue, every single political issue, every single lifestyle issue, but they're showing up like you would for a member of your family. The MLK Walk. January 15th this year. A year ago, last year, in 2017, in San Francisco, 100 people showed up. We said, no, and mostly black. A year later, we said, we need the allies to show up. 1,100 people show up,
awesome.
Okay? Mostly not black. And so you show up for work black on January 16th, the day after the MLK, you're saying, hey, wait a minute. If you felt isolated maybe before because of relatively low representation in the tech industry, you're saying, wait a minute, I saw you there, and I saw you there, and I saw you there. The feeling of inclusion and welcome is palpable, and it's just a different feeling of seeing your allies in the workplace and seeing them show up for you. Again, not saying that you necessarily agree on every single issue.
Terrific.
And Cheryl, can I just interject? Because the importance of these programs are so critical. If you have an employee that is at your office and they are the only one, I guarantee you they're miserable. I guarantee you, if you are the only black woman, if you are the only Latino man, if you are the only gay, or if you are the only woman, I guarantee you there's some misery involved in it. And so allyship or advocates are so important. It goes so far, if there are no other, you better very quickly get some more, for one. And two,
But in the
a
meantime.
stand-in, but in the meantime, or fake it till you make it, right? Get somebody in there that is in support of that one.
Yeah.
Get many, if possible.
Yeah. Let me expand on that. So I mentioned Hyderabad, and so we did not have Outforce, is what we call our employee resource group for the LGBTQ community and their allies. And Outforce formally last year didn't exist for us in India. And so we have a presence in Hyderabad and Bangalore, a few other cities in India, but a good-sized presence in Hyderabad. And so we went out this year for Pride, says we're gonna go out to Pride this year in Hyderabad, and we're gonna launch Outforce in India. And so this is gonna be great because we're gonna stand as an ally with the LGBTQ community in India. And as you know, in India, we don't have enough rights and protections here for the LGBT community. There's even fewer in India. And which was marvelous, except guess what? No one in the office was out. It wasn't one, it was zero.
Yeah.
In the midst of this launch, one person came out. So you think about the business value, back to the essence of the topic of the day, of that. So imagine you go through your life every day, your working day, not trying to out yourself. And that tax in the back of your mind, everyone here, I have those tapes that play in my mind about, well, is this because I'm black, or is this because of this, or this because of that? If you are closeted, how much of your energy you spend not outing yourself?
Yeah.
On that day when that person came out, that person was free. And all that energy they were spending trying to triangulate of what did I tell that person last time and not outing myself, that energy now goes to the benefit of whatever they want to put that against. But from a business value perspective, you have people walking around your workplace every day, spending a fair amount of their time playing these tapes, and people who are not out, working not to out themselves and spending a lot of their energy doing that. That's a core part of the business value of being your authentic self at work.
Yep. Terrific, absolutely. Matt, I wanted to bring you in because you said allies are also engaging around diversity at the board level. So
yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I maybe you should come back to this question of allies within organizations, because I think by and large the board has been quite separated from executive teams, managers, employee resource groups, and that may itself be an interesting question. But what we have seen, and what we continue to see, is a lot of ally work across organizations and across different stakeholders around the topic of board diversity. So organizations like the 30% Coalition, which is focused on gender diversity in the boardroom, have successfully pulled together institutional investors, corporations, advocates toward what, at the time they were founded, seemed like a long-away goal of 30% female representation on corporate boards, closing in, although still longer than we'd like to take. Or within the context of the consortium I mentioned earlier, where Quorum is working with representatives from other underrepresented communities in the boardroom, we've chosen, to your specific question, to take a specific issue around board diversity guidelines. That is, what do companies say about what diversity means to them in the boardroom? Kind of amazingly, despite what seems like a lot of conversation, for example, around gender diversity, only about 60% of Fortune 500 companies actually call out gender diversity as a desired demographic in their boardroom. Similar levels around racial and ethnic minorities. And so within the consortium of allies around board diversity, we've concluded this is not about recutting the same tiny slice, it's about growing the damn pie. And part of the way to do that is to engage with companies to say, be specific about what diversity means in your boardroom. Goldman, as Anilu was mentioning earlier, was really in the forefront of this ever since becoming a public company.
Terrific. So I want to shift a little bit in this next part. We've been talking about what's working, where the conversation is, but what's missing from the conversation around diversity and inclusion, and what do you think should be on the forefront for leaders? I'd love to start with you, Tony. You know, you've been talking about all these strides, but where else should we be making progress?
Equal pay. Equal pay for equal work. 4 words. Now, the challenge obviously is the execution of that, and no one's perfect here. You know, at Salesforce, we've worked hard to plant a flag to say that if you're doing the same job in the same locale, it's equal pay for equal work, right? Again, we've done that on 3 successive years and invested $8.7 million to that end to adjust salaries. No salaries were adjusted down, salaries were only adjusted up. Another front, formerly we had 9 employee resource groups. Actually, inside the company, we call them Ohana groups, which is the Hawaiian word for chosen family or extended family. So we think about it as extended family. So we had 9 Ohana groups. And then we heard voices inside our community of saying, well, wait, if I say, so Tony, how do you identify? Well, I identify as a Black, heterosexual, cisgendered man. But if someone else, you asked in that litany, and the top 2 or 3, they gave their faith, put it in there. They might put it first or second. They're saying, well, if a faith is core to my identity, how can I bring my authentic self to work? And so we thought about that, and we said, well, we're going to create, and this is to your earlier point, Lesley, almost exactly, a faith-based, interfaith employee resource group called Faithforce, and it's by far the fastest growing, and certainly was a pin-up demand there, for people to bring their faith in a way that's not divisive, that's constructive, that's not evangelizing, but just educating people and sensitizing them on all things about their faith, on holidays or dietary restrictions or all elements of it, to create a greater sense of empathy and acceptance of people of different faiths. So that was something that we saw of late, and that we're working on to make sure in a way that's, again, not divisive.
So that's interesting. So a holiday comes up, and how would this group then educate others in Salesforce? What does that look like?
You could have something in an activation in the lobby. We call them activations. I don't know if everyone uses that word, right? Where you just have a table. And it was, I might get this wrong, but I think it was the Farsi New Year, was something like in the last few months here. Not that that's faith-based, right? But it was an example. And so people came in, and this was a core part of their culture, and they're just educating people on what this is and what this means to them, and maybe sharing some of the delicacies that are associated with their culture, and just people that weren't familiar with these elements of culture, they're informed and they're empathetic, and they're like, well, I didn't know that, and that's an example. That's an example. Obviously, these are nuanced issues. They're sensitive issues, but we're committed to finding a path through here and trailblazing our way through here to make sure that if a faith is core to your identity, that you feel comfortable expressing that this is part of who you are. And so that's the journey that we're on, and we're trailblazing to try to do that.
Perfect. Very interesting. Thank you. Anilu, I'd like to bring you in here. If you took us into a meeting room with top leaders, what would we see today that's different and responsive to the issues that we've been talking about?
So it depends what room. And I say that because one of the things to realize is that people are in different places, even within your company. Even if you think that you have, that top-down message and that there are things that culturally are part of it, individually people are in different places. And so I think that you do need to meet them where they are. But I think one thing that we have seen change is definitely there's more calling my team and reaching out than reach out from my team. And so again, wherever you are, that's where you want to be. But I think what's missing, and what I'm hoping that in this moment in time is going to take us to, is it's on the one hand action. So to your point of, there are very clear things that all of our companies just need to do. But the other thing is, with this topic, there's a sense of you're boiling the ocean. And people feel very overwhelmed very quickly, and therefore they don't act. And so I think that what I want to see is not focusing on the extraordinary things that people need to do that seem so unattainable, but actually the ordinary things that come through your desk every day, that you have decision-making power, and if you use that to change the direction of where your organization is going, and everyone's doing that, the collective is it's math, right? Like, all the efforts are gonna add up. And so I'm trying to, one, not have that bystander situation that I talked about before, where everyone assumes that someone else is taking care of it and doing more. And then coming to that realization with senior, junior, everyone, that everyone actually can impact this on a day-to-day basis. And the only way that we are gonna actually move the needle more pronounced is if all of us do a little bit of this every single day. It can't be once a year, or when you think that you're gonna have the big discussion, it has to be every day.
Terrific, thank you. Lesley, I'd like to bring you in, and I thought maybe you would pick up on, Tony had talked about the challenges of operating a global company, which all of you are involved in. And so I'm just curious, when you think about the challenges for companies that are operating in so many different cultures with likely different interpretations of these important issues, If you could put something on the list that sort of helps to equal out how the issue is being looked at, how might you frame it?
Oh, so HP does business in 170 countries across the globe. And not all countries are created equal, as Tony pointed out. In some countries, homosexuality is illegal, for example. And so the one thing that we will continue to push, is that our value system, so to Annalee's point, you might see different things in different rooms, but the reality is but we share one common goal, and that is we respect each other. We have integrity in the work that we do. And so the intentionality that we put into developing our board of directors and being very diverse is the same intentionality that our global council put into really pushing this 10% holdback with the legal industry. And our chief marketing officer put around our free the bid, and in fact working with Edelman on that, and making sure that our agencies and customers and partners are being held accountable to the same level of accountability that we are. And so my belief is that there's not one single company or organization that could solve this equality and equity and diversity and inclusion, thing that's going on. It takes us all, and it takes us all being very intentional about making that happen. And so when we look at that globally, it is keep pushing, and it's the more concept of just every day do more. And it's do more within the legal rights of your country. And you can push that too, from a government standpoint. But from a corporate standpoint, within and across the globe, it is a single value, and that doesn't change no matter where you are.
But just on that point, I mean, one thing, and I think that all of our companies have had an opportunity to do this, we have the ability to advocate for situations in government where the environment is not where it is. And we all have very successful examples of that. And that is really important, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is talent. And we need to be able to get the best talent around and move it around the world. And so I think it's a responsibility of all of our companies to be engaged, but it also has an impact on our employees, even if they're not in that group. Yeah. And so they're very proud to see your company take a stance. And so if there's anything that you're thinking of that is important to you and that you're talking to your employees, talk to your government affairs office, talk to your people in human resources. Definitely tell other people, because that is actually one of the great things about us working together on this.
And by the way, we all want the same talent, right?
Yeah.
It's like technology, technologists, no matter where you go, whether it's in finance, in technology, in advertising, we all want great talent. So we've got to all be in this together to make this happen.
It's a great point. Matt, let's come back over to you here. How do you think about some of these issues, and also what do you see that's missing that you think needs to be bubbling up to the top?
Yeah, so I think what's so interesting is, as I mentioned at the top of the conversation, there's more expectation and or permission being given to companies to take a leading stake on societal issues. What's been interesting is companies do rightfully, as Anilu says, speak up. The challenge then needs to maybe put up a mirror. And how are you actually, as a company, doing in terms of meeting the standard that you're now challenging the marketplace or trying to live up to in the marketplace?
Are you thinking of something specific with that?
Well, I think it's just an instance of looking around at companies who are trying to figure out, and this is where our council gets in, how are they engaging in society? And part of that conversation is how are they reflective of what's going on in society? And I think Lesley mentioned HP has been a fantastic challenge to Edelman about how are we doing in terms of meeting and delivering a diverse workforce and team to HP. And it's evolved our own thinking, and it gets to, I think, where many companies need to be now, which is more deliberative, prescriptive, and really lean in on data and analytics, and set accountable goals and be transparent about those. And so at Edelman, we have 70% of our workforce are women, but only 44% of the leadership team are women. And we've set a goal of by 2020 to have that be 50-50. And that requires very deliberative and quite prescriptive efforts around both recruitment, but also advancement, career planning, everything that goes into that. But probably as important is it's not relegated to the talent team's job. It's what's coming out of leadership's mouth and what demonstration of engagement and commitment is coming from the C-suite. And I think that that's another area that, when we're working with our clients, they need to become increasingly comfortable with speaking up and understanding that they're going to be held accountable and be more transparent.
So now, as part of the sales pitch, when you're pitching for the business, also what you're doing internally, do you think that plays a role in those, because you're saying...
We're honest about where we need to continue to improve and what we're working on as ourselves. We're also, increasingly there's much more opportunity to work and partner with our clients around employee engagement. And a lot of the work is in this space. And we need to ensure that we're walking the talk and practicing what we preach. And that's a big part of it.
Great. Matt, I'd love to bring you in on this too and hear a little bit about what's on your wish list that you think, leaders should be talking about.
So I'll pick up on one of Matt's points. There is an unbelievable paucity of data and reporting about board diversity. I alluded to that a little bit earlier. I'm happy to say, and maybe not surprisingly, that the 3 publicly traded companies to my left all report in their annual proxy on the demographics of their board, but they are in the minority. Only about 15% of Fortune 500 companies provide that level of transparency. A much smaller fraction of smaller publicly traded companies provide those data, and it's almost impossible to find those data about private equity funded companies or venture funded companies. And unsurprisingly, what gets counted and what gets measured actually gets changed. And so until we see more opportunity for the ability to collect data and understand the demographics of boards, it's going to be hard to figure out where we are and hard to figure out where we're going to go. So I think that's one of the key pieces. And it funnels into some of the conversation we were having earlier. Part of the reason, in addition to the unbelievable mismatch of talent and board representation on gender has actually been relatively easy to figure out, even for external third parties. Much harder to look at a list of board of directors members and say who identifies as Latino, much less who identifies with a gay orientation or who is transgender. And until we get companies actually stepping forward to put that information in the public domain, it's going to be hard to figure out how to make progress.
I think you bring up a really important point, and I know that all of you have been, as you're saying, collecting some statistics. Tony, you were talking about some employee data that you thought really was helping to inform some of Salesforce's work. Would you want to share a couple of key data points, and then we'll let the group open it up for questions?
Sure. I think the essential element on any journey is accountability, holding yourself accountable and having all of your stakeholders be able to hold you accountable. So in that spirit, what Salesforce has been doing, is being transparent about the representation of the company. Not because we think we're leading there, but because we want to be transparent and be accountable. So for example, a year ago, we reported these data in December, we had 30.1% women worldwide working for the company. And then this year, again, that would be December of 2017, we had 30.9% women working for the company. And so we're on an annual cadence of reporting. It's nothing to celebrate, but it's modest improvement. But because the company's growing at scale, that means in that 1 year, 2,000 more women work for Salesforce. Yeah. 2,000 more women work for Salesforce than it did the year prior. There's another level of accountability and transparency that we've offered. And so in June of last year, I think anyone who's from a US-based company knows about the EEO1 data. And so we also published our EEO1 data. So you literally can go to salesforce.com/equality on your smartphone. Brinder's on it's mobile friendly, and you can see these data. And it's not because we think there's some progress, some pockets of progress, and places where we need to do more work, but we're just working to be transparent. And we know that will drive progress. So every month, every executive who works for our CEO who has more than 500 people gets a scorecard. We talked about what's different, right? In the room, now a year later, what's on the scorecard? How many women work for you? How many women did you hire? How many women did you promote? How many women left the company that worked for you for whatever reason? Today, a month ago, a year ago, this month. Same in the US for underrepresented and people of color. Likewise, VP+. So it's not just about improving the cohort broadly. We certainly want to do that, but we want to make sure up to the boardroom that the company looks like society. Same scorecard once a month. How many people do you have that are VP+, that are women, et cetera? The same litany, the same data. And so we see these without quotas, without targets. That's our approach at this point, right? But these data immediately, a call to action that people, they reflect on these data and they see. And the great thing about it is, though, even though the basis doesn't change quickly, you can see vectors of goodness and things that aren't so good, in terms of attrition or hiring or promotion in a month, where you might not, the basis might not change, the total cohort percentage might not change so quickly, but you can see anomalies that cause people to have much less latency, much more real-time view of what's going on in the folks that they are accountable for.
You can see that changing that incentive structure will really change behavior. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. I'd love, since we only have 10 minutes left, to be able to open it up to the group, and I'm sure there's so much more here to share, so I'm looking forward to your questions right here in the front.
Yes, my name is Gina Diaz Barroso from Mexico City. I'm a businesswoman and I am CEO of my company, and I represent the women of Mexico at the G20. And I listen to all of you, and I'm very pleased to see that we are making a little bit of an advance in the diversity. I think the problem, well, I have a question, but also a comment. My comment is that we talk about diversity and the right of women and LGBT and Latino and Black community, and I think we should be talking about business, because I do think that the data should be the profits of the companies. Because like I was speaking at the last G20 meeting with Christine Lagarde, and she was telling me that the only way that we will really speed things up is if we convince the companies that this is about business, and we are leaving checks on the table, money on the table, if we do not add diversity.
Thank you.
So,
would one of you like to
I don't think that you're going to find disagreement.
No,
Yeah.
I thought that's where we started the conversation,
Yeah.
actually. It is about the business. And the interesting thing is I'm trying to get to the question kind of behind your question.
I was going to go to my question.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, my question was that if you think that we should start because in the case of Mexico, we're much worse than you are here. We have a 5% board women. And we are thinking that maybe what we should do there, what I know your opinion is in the case of the United States, is education. Since they are young, to educate children that is the way they should grow, and they should grow to put their own companies in place. Because I do think that the problem is that we're trying to target the problem when it's a little bit too late. So I don't know whether you think that we should start in education in the very early stage.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think in our field, the advertising and communication space has been quite poor about diversity. And yet academia has been doing a very good job of developing talent. And we now have partnerships with universities, the Emma Bowen Foundation, and a commitment around the programming for interns in particular to give them introduction and exposure to our world. Because in many instances, first-generation college students haven't been introduced to the universe of marketing and communications, PR, et cetera. And so we're finding that it's helping us ensure that we've got diversity of experience and amongst a particular generation. But we can't just have that be one aspect. We've got to ensure that we're continuously working as well against leadership. But I'm hopeful about the future because the demographics in the States just are going to help us in that respect as well.
Yeah, I would say yes, but yes. Should we be focusing on education? Absolutely. You think around the world, of the countries where a girl or a young woman isn't even welcomed in school, isn't even entitled to an education. Let's start there, right? I think the challenge, and then for Salesforce, the commitment to great public, in the US, we would call it K-12, right? Kindergarten to 12th grade, so primary education, great education for everyone, that every child deserves a great education. And the folks that generally are left behind are, particularly in STEM, are young women and girls. So absolutely, so it's a commitment for the company. We invest tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of volunteer hours in this cause. Each executive at the company is strongly encouraged to adopt a school. Mine is Roosevelt Middle School in San Francisco, where you're focused on intersecting young people at a time where you can make a difference in their life and be a role model to them. Having said that, too much of the focusing so far out on the focal length, it leaves like a generational problem. Like, well, we'll get to that in 10 years. The problem's really a pipeline problem, and then it can be used as a shield or an excuse. You've got to make those investments, and it has to be a priority, and that's part of the role, I think, of every institution, whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, to make a difference in this society and on this planet for the next generation. At the same time, you cannot argue that there's not qualified, underrepresented people and people of all gender identities for pretty much any career that's represented up here. So you have to be the yes and do both, work both ends of the pipeline.
Short term, long term.
Thank you. Right behind you. Yep. You in the red. And then I'll come to you next. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mamta Patel. I'm with Accenture. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on such an important topic. A couple of you mentioned recruitment. We all know recruitment is an important part of the process or the employee life cycle to increase diversity in companies. What are some intentional decisions or tactics that you've taken to remove unconscious bias in recruiting and increase diversity that way?
I'm happy to go ahead. So for HP, I love the question because it was one of the first things I identified was, well, if we have a recruiting problem, like look at what the workforce is. And let's start there. And so one of the things that we did was we did unconscious bias training in general across all of the leadership. And we believe in leaders at all levels, but leaders with actual titles and leaders at all levels. And then what we did was, and you can actually look these up on YouTube, we did a video campaign called Reinvent Mindsets. The Reinvent Mindsets campaign was exclusively designed to kind of debunk some of the myths that occur around hiring, ultimately saying to African Americans, young women, to the LGBT community, and we just recently released our Latino one around Latino jobs, hashtag Latino jobs. And by first saying, one, we want you here at HP. We're taking very deliberate and intentional measures in order to do education around unconscious bias, to really look at job descriptions in and of themselves could be part of the problem that we have, right? How they're written. Either people decide to apply or they don't. And in a lot of cases, women and underrepresented groups opt out from the start. So if you wonder why you're not getting people in, it starts that early. And then in addition to that, we wanted to be very true and authentic when we release this campaign to say that first we want to make sure that it is true to who we are as a company, our culture, our brand, and then we'll go external with that as well. And so that was just one thing that we've done.
We've done structure interviewing, and that was a long process for us because you have to not only come up with the questions, but then you have to train people. And one of the things that we discovered, which again, like it shouldn't be that difficult, but when you're confronted with it is, not everyone is a good interviewer, and therefore not everyone should interview. And so we believe very strongly now in being a lot more deliberate about how we're training our interviewers. And one of the very interesting pieces of data that we're tracking is how do they do? So when you're making decisions and you're hiring, what happens to people when they come to the firm? And also, how are you scoring people relative to some others? And we discovered that there are pockets of our organization that are much better because, in fact, their work actually happens to be very structured. So there is a competency innate in them. And so we did that at the campus level. We're trying to expand that to the experienced hire level, which is, I think all of us know, is a lot more challenging. But we're gonna put the effort because it goes in the theme of decision making. And so unconscious bias, we all are talking about, but at the end of the day, we're talking about decisions. And when do you do decisions? When you're vulnerable. And hiring is a vulnerable time.
Terrific, thank you. I think we could get in one more question. I saw that you had your hand up.
Hi there, thank you for your insights today. I wanted to go back to the concept of allied groups, as we were calling them. I work for a mid-sized nonprofit performing arts company here in LA. We have an IDEA task force that's inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And one of the outcomes of that, it's a relatively recent initiative, is the formation of 4 affinity groups. Those affinity groups are just open to members that identify with those categories: LGBTQIA, parents, people of color, and women. And a lot of you talked about the importance of having allies included in that conversation. So I think the reason that it's closed off is that it's supposed to be a safe space for those people so that they're talking with their peers who can kind of understand where they're coming from. But I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of the balance there with welcoming allies versus not.
Great, thanks. We just have a minute left. Who'd like to address that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a paradox, that you want to be able to celebrate your culture and celebrate your diversity as a group, but at the same time you want to be included. And I think the challenge is if you create a group that's solely and consistently and uniformly only people of one identity, that you're not building those bridges of empathy. You're not letting anyone learn more about the experience. And then if you're significantly underrepresented, and you're underrepresented in leadership, now those mentors and sponsors and advocates and champions that you need, they're not in the room, they're not learning. So it's a challenge. I think you need to have times when you can have that a safe space, right? But there has to be times of community where you're bringing people along for the journey, where they're learning and developing appreciation and a rapport, and not necessarily changing their views per se, but at least having a bit of empathy.
I think ending it on a note that everybody wants to be included and feel welcome is perfect for this panel. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to each of you.